open up Goodreads, get your notebook, because I am about to add a bunch of books to your TBR. Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Brianna and this is 4 Paws in a Book. I make bookish videos over here on my little corner of the internet, so if that's something that you're interested in, make sure that you hit the subscribe button down below. We are gearing up for the Amazing Readathon 2024, which happens in June, so if you are stumbling upon this video, I'll link the announcement up above. But one of the bonuses that you get for your team is if you read a book by an LGBTQ+ author. As it is Pride Month in June, we want to make sure that we are celebrating these authors and really promoting their books. So I've got a bunch of authors for you. There are over 50 on this list across all of the genres for the Amazing Readathon. You know what? The world is your oyster. Here you go. I have authors that write across a variety of different genres, and then I will be talking about each individual genre group for the Amazing Readathon. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, please go check the announcement video out if you want to participate. If you're just here for queer authors to add to your TBR, you are also in the right spot. Like I said, I've got a bunch for you. For the bonus points for the Amazing Readathon, they do have to be confirmed LGBTQ+, so I wanted to make sure that all of these authors were. I'm obviously not trying to out anybody. So if you have more, let me know down in the comments, and we'll just add to this ever-growing list. But let's start out with the authors that write across multiple genres, and then, like I said, we will move into the specific genres. I will have everything timestamped below, so if you're only looking for certain genres, I've got you covered. First up, we have Canden Calendar. Now, Canden Calendar writes a lot of YA and middle grade stories, but has recently ventured into the adult romance genre, which is really cool. So I have read Felix Ever After, and I really loved it. Also has King of the Dragonflies, and then his most recent one was Stars in Your Eyes, which was the adult romance. He also has a couple of fantasy series as well. I am going to be trying to be really brief with these, so feel free to screenshot these as you need, but I'm not going to be going over every single book because we would be here forever. Next up, we have Alice Oseman. Now, she does predominantly write in the YA contemporary space, but the reason why I'm saying that this is multiple genres is because some are classified as contemporary and some are classified as romance, and as you know, for the Amazing Readathon, that's 2 different genres for us. The ones that are not very romance heavy or romance forward could fit for our general fiction team, and the ones that are more romance heavy would fit for our romance team. Obviously, Heartstopper is a huge favorite, but she has a ton of other stories as well. Next up, we have Sarah Gailey. Now, Sarah writes a wide variety of genres. When I was looking for their books, obviously we have horror with Just Like Home, which was a super popular book a couple of years ago. The Echo Wife kind of leans a little bit more sci-fi. Upright Women Wanted, while kind of sci-fi, is also a Western. So that's a really interesting genre blend. And then they also have a couple of fantasy books as well. Sarah also writes predominantly shorter books. I don't know that all of their books are short, but a lot of them are under 300 pages. So this could also be a really good pickup for Face Off Weekend. Then we have Seanan McGuire / Myra Grant. She writes her horror stories under Myra Grant and her fantasy stories under Seanan McGuire. And then she also has a sci-fi series that I did not know about, but Alien Echo, I believe, is more sci-fi than anything else. I absolutely love the Wayward Children series. Again, a super short read that you could read during Face Off. And then Into the Drowning Deep is actually one of my host favorites. Hopefully during Amazing Readathon, I am going to be trying to pick up Feed. This is one that I'm really interested in. It's kind of a zombie story, and I feel like I could be here for that. Next up, we have Rivers Solomon, and they write mostly like fantasy, but definitely has some horror elements to it. So I feel like you could probably fit it under either category. The Deep is a shorter story. It's the only one that I've read of theirs. However, An Unkindness of Ghosts, I think, is more sci-fi leaning because I think it takes place on a spaceship. Next up, we have Becky Chambers. Just like Alice Oseman, she writes in the contemporary and romance space. I think that some of them are definitely classified as romance and others are classified more as contemporary. So it'll just be up to your judgment call which genre you put that in. Then we have Alexis Hall. Alexis writes across like almost every single genre. Well, maybe not horror, but mystery. Definitely mystery. There are 2 host favorites from Alexis Hall on this list from 2 different teams. So we have A Lady for a Duke, which is Izzy's favorite. So you would get bonus GRC for that. And then The Affair of the Mysterious Letter was Leandra's pick for Team Spooky because it's a mystery. And I am actually really curious about this one. I've read a couple of books from Alexis Hall, and while they're not necessarily my favorite, I am very curious about a couple of these. Another one that is on my favorites list, and that is Elliot Schreffer with The Darkness Outside Us, which is a sci-fi romance. I would say that it's sci-fi before it's a romance. The romance is kind of the B plot of this story, but it is fantastic, and I just reread it, and I will have a vlog probably next week for this. Elliot has also written Charming Young Man, which is a historical story, also very queer. Wasn't my favorite, but I know that a lot of people did like it, so I'm still putting it on here. I also think he has a middle grade, what I thought was fantasy series as well. I have not read it though, so I didn't put it on here because I don't know what genre it is actually. Then we have Adiba Jagadar, and she writes mostly YA and middle grade contemporary stories, but she also has a historical heist story in A Million to One, which is kind of like if there was a sapphic heist on the Titanic. Seems like it could be good. I haven't read it though. But her contemporary stories are absolutely adorable. I read one, I think, during Amazing Readathon last year. So cute. Then we have Ryan Lasala, and he started out in fantasy with Reverie and Bedazzled. Those were his first books. And then The Honeys, which is a YA horror story. I am really hoping to read this during Amazing Readathon. The spinner wheel is not always kind to me, and you know, deciding which team that I should be on when I want to be on it. But that's okay. I have a large pile of possibilities, and that is perfectly fine. Next up, we have Kaylin Bayron, and she started out in the YA fantasy sphere with Cinderella is Dead, which is a Cinderella retelling. And then This Poison Heart and This Wicked Fate was also fantasy, but then her newest book, You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight, actually is a horror. So at that point, she gets to cross genres. Next up, Adam Silvera. He was definitely one of the first authors that really entered the queer YA contemporary space. He has been around the booktube for as long as I have been, which is a long time. He started out writing YA contemporary with mostly queer characters, but he also has a fantasy series, and I have not read it, but it is here. It does exist. Then we have Kay Ankrum, who writes contemporary and then contemporary adjacent books. And so I have them in the fantasy and the sci-fi setting, but it's kind of like they take place on Earth, but in the case of The Weight of the Stars, there is definitely like a sci-fi element to it, even though it takes place on Earth because her mother is off on a space adventure. I absolutely loved Darling. It was a Peter Pan retelling, but with a much darker twist, almost verging on a thriller. I don't think it was a thriller, but it was dark. Then we have Ashley Poston, and she, I think, is most known for her romances, both in the YA space with the Geekerella series, but then also most recently with The Dead Romantics and The 7-Year Slip. But she also has a sci-fi series that I may have picked up that I'm gonna try because I absolutely loved her romance. So maybe it will translate. And then she also has a fantasy series as well. Lastly, for the authors that write across multiple genres, we do have V.E. Schwab or Victoria Schwab. She writes under both pen names, and she writes middle grade horror with City of Bones. She writes YA and adult fantasy, and then I think that I would probably classify the Vicious series as sci-fi. So across multiple genres. Okay, now let's move into authors that write predominantly fantasy. They may have the outlying other genre out there, but this is what they're predominantly known for. So first up, we have Aiden Thomas, and he, I think, is probably most known for Cemetery Boys, which was his debut and the one that just really skyrocketed his career. My personal favorite is definitely Lost in the Neverwoods, which is a Peter Pan retelling, and then he also has the Sunbearer Trials series as well. But all of these are YA fantasy. Then we have Shelley Parker Chan, who wrote She Who Became the Sun and the sequel to it. These are adult military fantasy books. Then we have Molly Knox Ostrag, and Molly writes mostly YA and middle grade graphic novels that are like fantastical based. I've read The Girl from the Sea, which was super cute, about a Selkie, and she also has a lot of like witchy queer stories. Then we have Nevo, who has written a multitude of different books. We have The Siren Queen, which is kind of a historical fantasy, and then the series of novellas that start out with The Empress of Salt and Fortune. There's a bunch of those. Again, a super short book that you could pick up for Face Off Weekend. Next up, we have Zoranjay Chow. Now, I think that Iron Widow could be probably classified as either fantasy or sci-fi. I think there's an argument made for both of them, so I would be fine with either genre claiming this, but they also have a middle grade fantasy series as well. Then we have A.M. Strickland, who has very, very queer YA fantasy stories. Now these are very much on the upper side of YA. There's a book about vampires, and my personal favorite is In the Ravenous Dark. It deals with blood magic and going down to hell and, you know, rescuing a demon boy. Then we have A.J. Hackwith, and this book might look familiar because The Library of the Unwritten is one of my host favorites, and you can use any one of these three and get the bonus money for it. But it's a whole story about what happens to the stories that never actually get written, and they go to this library in hell, and our librarian is there to keep everything safe, and then one of the characters gets out and causes mayhem. Next up we have Samantha Shannon, and she has written obviously The Prior of the Orange Tree and the Day of Fallen Night series. Very, very big books, so maybe not one you want to pick up in the month. However, it would be a lot of points if you can read fast. Then we have Tasha Suri, who writes political fantasy with sapphic characters and like a sapphic subplot. I wouldn't say it's a fantasy romance, although I have not read Empire of Sand yet, and I do think that one might be a fantasy romance. Then we have Heather Nix, and this is actually an author that I met at a Polycon, and she has 2 books out. Woodbourne, which was sold to me as a failed D&D campaign but with lots of lesbians. And then we have Mixing Up Mayhem, which is a cozy fantasy with lots of baking. So 2 very different vibes. I'm kind of here for it. Lastly, on the list of fantasy authors, we have Jay Talsqual, and he is a self-published author. He was actually in Spiffbone 9, which is where I actually started talking to him and started reviewing his books. So I have read Legacy of the Vermilion Blade, which is the first book in the series, and the audiobook is fantastic. I'm just gonna put that out there. And then we have Promise of the Betrayer's Dagger, which is the second book in the series. I have not gotten to this one yet. However, Jay did send it to me, so I'm definitely gonna be trying to read it as quickly as possible, because like, look at these covers. Whoever did his covers, fantastic. Gold. Let's move on to a couple of authors that I have for the fiction team. Now, these are going to be either contemporary or historical fiction. First up, we have Morgan Rogers, who wrote Honey Girl. Now, this one probably, like, you can maybe argue is a romance, but I feel like at the heart of this book, it's actually a coming-of-age story. It's a contemporary story. It's about her trying to find herself. It really deals with the intersection of being queer and being in STEM and being a Black woman, and I think it was done so well, and it's a really funny, lighthearted story at the same time. Okay, battery died, had to restart it. But next up we have Isaac Fitzsimmons, who again, I think you could probably classify this as romance or contemporary, but personally I think it falls more under the contemporary side. I think at the heart of it, the Passing Playbook is definitely a coming out story, a coming of age story, a discovering yourself story, more so than a romance, even though there is a romance plot in it. Next up we have Melinda Lowe. Now, Last Night at the Telegraph Club is a historical story, which is my host favorite for this genre. Again, I will be having a video where I read all of these. And then there is another book that she wrote, A Scatter of Light, which takes place in the same universe, but in the early 2000s. I can't remember exactly. I haven't read this one yet, but I might do that during Amazing Readathon. You never know. Then we have Nina LaCour. She writes a lot of YA contemporary stories, but also has an adult story with Yerba Buena, which is kind of more of a lit fic story. Then we have Sophie Gonzalez. Again, could probably fit into the romance or the contemporary side of things, depending on which story that you read. I've only read Perfect on Paper, and I think at its heart, again, this is a discovering yourself story with a romantic subplot with it. And then we have Raquel Marie. Now, I have only read Ofilia After All, so I do not know about the rest of her books, but she has specifically said that Ofilia After All is not a romance, it is a contemporary. These are YA stories. They are about discovering yourself and discovering who you are and your identity and all the difficulties that come along with that. All right, moving on to science fiction, I have a couple of authors for you. First off, Becky Chambers. Of course, we have A Psalm for the Wild Built, the monk and robot duology, but then we also have The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, which is more of like a space opera story. I love Monk and Robot. Absolutely love this series. And A Psalm for the Wild Built is a host favorite for Brittany. And I haven't read Long Way to a Small Angry Planet or any of that series. It does fall a little bit more on the cozy side, which has me hesitant to pick it up, but so many people love this series. Oh, who knows, I might have to try it. I'm adding all these books to my own TBR. what am I gonna do? Then we have Tams Mure, who wrote the Locked Tomb trilogy. I think there's actually gonna be 4. It's not a trilogy anymore. But Gideon the Ninth is the first book in this series. This is lesbian necromancers in space. That's the best way to explain this series. Then we have Everina Maxwell, who wrote Winter's Orbit and Ocean's Echo. This is kind of like Star Wars, but make it really gay. It's a very political sci-fi series. And there is a romantic subplot to both of these, so if you're looking for romance, this definitely has it. Then we have Nino Pizzi, who wrote the Finna duology, and this is a very short novella duology. It's kind of like IKEA, but maybe there's a portal universe inside, and our retail workers have to deal with that. I actually read Finna during Face Off weekend last year, so this could definitely be a good option for you. And then lastly, a book that I have not read, so I have no idea if it's any good or not, but I'm putting it on here anyways. Miko Canden has written The Archive Undying, and it's on my TBR. I do own it, but I haven't read it yet. But it's kind of like a political sci-fi. I think it has like gods in it and maybe robots or cyborgs. I don't know. Moving on to romance, I do have a lot of options for this. Obviously, I read a lot of queer romances, so I've got all of the recommendations for you. First off, Allison Cochran has written some fantastic adult contemporary romances. The Charm Offensive has some of the best mental health rep that I've ever seen in a book. She also has a brand new book out that just came out in April, which I will 100% be picking up in June. I specifically saved it for June, and that should tell you something. Then we have Lex Croucher, who has written adult historical romance, but then also has a YA rom-com. Which sounds really fun. Anita Kelly has written adult contemporary romances with non-binary characters, or at least one of the characters is non-binary. I don't know about the other one. These books range from baking shows to sports romances, so we have quite the range here. Then my favorite, my queen, Ashley Herring Blake, has a lot of books, but like obviously for me is most well known for the Bright Falls trilogy with Delilah Green and Astrid Parker and Iris Kelly. We love these ladies, okay? But she also has some YA and some middle grade stories as well that probably could fit into the contemporary, so she probably should have been at the beginning, but I just know her for romance. Then we have Alexandra Bellefier, again contemporary romance, has the Written in the Stars trilogy, then the Fiancé Farce, and her newest one, Truly Madly Deeply. All of these have queer characters in them, and I don't think I've given her less than 3 stars, and that was only one book. The other ones have all been 5. We can't do a queer author's recommendation list for romance without adding Katie Robert in here. She has several different series. One is more fantasy based with the Dragon's Bride, and then Neon Gods and the Wicked Villain series is more contemporary based with just a slight fantastical element. They're very smutty, very steamy, and there are so many queer characters in there. Then the other queen of my heart, Talia Hibert, the Brown Sisters, definitely has some queer representation in it. She also has the Ravenswood series, which is one of her indie books and definitely more steamy because it's indie. She also has a fantasy romance, if you wanted that. It's not my favorite, but she has it. I know that I am not putting every single queer romance author on this list, but there's so many and I have to make room for the other genres. But we're going to end with Ruby Barrett. Now, I absolutely loved her book, The Romance Recipe. It was so queer, it was so spicy. But she also has a new book out this year called The Friendship Study, and I'm very, very excited about this one. I may have already picked it up. Possibly. Okay, now let's move on to our thrillers and horrors, or mystery, thriller, and horror. I will say this is probably the smallest group that I have, so if you have some more, please leave them down below. But I have a couple for you. First up, we have Ryan Douglas, and he wrote The Taking of Jake Livingston, which is a YA thriller horror, kind of like Get Out, I think is how it's been comped to, but YA. This one was super, super hyped when it came out. Unfortunately, I have not read it, but it's gotten great reviews. Then we have Eric Laroka, who writes a lot of adult horror novels. A lot of them are super short, so again, good idea for a face-off weekend. These ones have a ton of content warnings though, and they can be pretty gory, so go in knowing that and keep yourself safe. Then we have Carmen Maria Machado, and she has written a lot of books, but she's most known for Her Body and Other Parts, which is a horror anthology of a bunch of short stories. And then also In the Dream House is another one of her popular books. I believe this one's actually a memoir. but I've also seen it housed in horror, so I'm not really sure. Lastly, I have Andrew Joseph White, and he has written a few YA dystopian horror stories. I've read Hell Followed With Us, and this is like a very much an end of the world apocalyptic story, but with demons. I wouldn't necessarily classify this as sci-fi, even though most dystopian is kind of classified as sci-fi. This one is like very much horror. We're dealing with angels and demons and some really messed up things. Like, this one has a lot of content warnings as well. For a YA book, this one is graphic. And then The Spirit Bears Its Teeth is a YA horror, like set in 1800s England, about misogyny and transphobia and ableism. It's from the perspective of an autistic trans boy. I really liked Hell Followed With Us. I think that his writing is fantastic, and this is definitely one that I am also interested in as well. Okay, so that was a lot of authors. I think it was close to 50, maybe more than 50. I'm not really sure. I'm not gonna count. It was a lot of queer authors for you to pick up next month or any other month, as we should always be reading from queer authors. But if you want those bonus points for the Amazing Readathon next month, this is a great place to start. I can confidently say that some of these books will fit city prompts. I don't know how many of them, but a lot of them, as well as multiple sightseeing prompts. Like I said, if I missed anybody, which I know I did, because there's definitely more than 50 queer authors out there, but leave them in the comments below. Let me know what book you love from them. And if you're not feeling chatty, let's do the rainbow flag emoji. If you are interested in the Amazing Readathon, I will go ahead and put the announcement video right here for you. Easy to click on. And if you're new here and you have not yet subscribed, there's a little button that you can do so down below the video. If you'd like to hang out with me more, the links to my Instagram, Goodreads, Twitter, and my Patreon are linked in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!